laundry list and stuff. So.
One thing that's come up for us a couple of times, and I think has come up for other partners as well, the focus has very much been on impaired waterways, bringing them back to meet water quality standards. In our region, and I assume in others, there are waterways where we see them going toward impairment. They're not impaired now, but we'll have this one creek that is the last one of a drinking water supply that hasn't been impaired. It's starting to be developed. Has there been any movement in 319 or other non-point source programs toward moving toward allowing some funding for preservation, for keeping things from being impaired?
I'll take it. Hi, by the way, I know Mitch was I'm Pamela Casewell. I'm with the State Board, and I'm the grants coordinator. Recently, in our last round of grant applications with 319 funding, we actually funded Healthy Watersheds. We funded developing a watershed protection plan in the North Llano River watershed, and so that's a Healthy Watersheds initiative. And so we're moving in that path, and we'll accept those kinds of applications and projects in the future.
Will those have to be priorities out of the WAP process?
Yes. And that's what we mean by a special interest water body. There are non-impaired waters that we've identified some entity that's been involved in the process that this is an important water body. It's not impaired, but we want it on the slip.
And Aaron didn't mention it either, but in those coordinated monitoring meetings, that's the best place for y'all to make those recommendations to the river authorities to be able to include that. So for watershed coordinators, it's very important for y'all to participate in those coordinated monitoring meetings and Clean Rivers meetings so that you can have that voice and make sure that that is included on that list whenever they go, when we start developing that priority watershed report.
And there is an EPA initiative called Healthy Watersheds Initiative, and it's set up to address specifically issues like that, where there may be, endangered species, or there's just a whole host of things that could be present in a water body or watershed that makes it special interest. Fortunately, our regional Healthy Watersheds coordinator, Brian Fontenot, is in the audience today. If you want to know more about that initiative, he can tell you a lot about it. There's a website set up for it on the EPA website, so if you want, you can Google that and find it. But Brian is here as a resource.
And in most cases, it seems like these are local initiatives that come to us rather than us going out looking for things. There are local groups that have an interest in this, and they learn about what we do and see the complementary nature of things, and so they come to us seeking participation in our program, and so we can now have a real clear way for that to happen.
Well, maybe outline within the WAP process where that comes in. I guess I'm having, if you could give me a scenario of how that would work within the whole WAP process. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around exactly how this is going to work. I see you're going to be meeting with coordinated monitors, meeting with the partners, which I'm assuming is probably primarily CRP and maybe some agency partners. And then you're going to the local watershed, based on those previous sets of meetings with the monitoring and the CRP partners. Are you going to the watershed and say, we've made a decision that the best route for you would be a TMDL, and we want your input on this? Or
No.
Okay.
What you just said, we made a decision what's best for you. That's not the way this is happening. We're making a recommendation based on what we know, and we put a lot of effort into making that recommendation, but it's still open for discussion with people who may have a different opinion, and we're laying it out here that we are open to further discussion on these recommended strategies, and we'll do whatever it takes to pursue that, be it additional meetings, studies, interim studies. We can't anticipate all potential outcomes here, but the concept is that we are open for further discussion and further exploration of circumstances and how best to move forward. So we're not making any final decisions. Now, things are ongoing, so it's kind of hard to stop the train once you're 2 years into a TMDL, and people say, well, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not fun. There are issues like that have to be addressed, but the idea here is to try to get more consensus on how to proceed before the train leaves the station.
I think I would say that there are three primary ways for a citizen, a landowner, another entity that's not a CRP entity to give us input. One is your regular, direct, one-on-one contact with either TCQ 9.4 staff, State Board staff, or the Clean Rivers Program partner for your agency. Those regular communications that you have with them at the breaks here, at other meetings, and the conversations you have with them about priorities. Number two is these coordinated monitoring meetings. While coordinated monitoring meetings in the past are historically only those entities that are monitoring, they are public meetings, and other citizens and landowners, of course, are welcome to attend, but it's primarily an agency discussion. That's historically been. But they're open and public meetings. But tied to that are the Basin Steering Committee. And so when the public are really invited to those, river authorities and entities, I think we'll have this discussion about what their priorities are in their basin. And that needs to be conveyed through either the steering committee or the coordinated monitoring meetings. That's primarily, I think, how that input can be received to guide these recommendations and ultimately what gets funded.
And a significant number of listings on the 303D list, as the WAP process was unable to identify a particularly clear path forward. So those are kind of in a holding pen, waiting further discussions, just as we're talking about. The partners were not able to really clearly identify a path forward in some of these cases. So those are still on the table.
And if you look at the table, I think it says that the strategy is evaluation and the status is consultation. So it means that us, the CRP, TCQ State Board Group, we need to consult with other entities, other citizens. And so that's identified on maybe, what do we say, 20% of them?
No, I don't think it's not that many. I think it's maybe 50 listings that clearly fall into this category of we need help from stakeholders or others on how to proceed.
But that's to get back to the question also, this issue, this is still a new and evolving process. We don't know what we're going to do because I'm fairly certain that we don't have a plan to go and hold 50 public meetings like this right now. I know that some of them are going to be held. In fact, there's one being held Monday in Refugio to talk about a specific watershed with those landowners and those citizens. And so those could happen, but that's not currently necessarily the plan.
And that's a TMDL project meeting. So kind of the new arena we're in now. TMDL is not doing that in isolation anymore. They are part of the WAP process. So the information they develop in that meeting will be brought forward to the meetings with State Board and River Authority and Water Quality Standards and others in the program to receive input and feedback on how that's working out. So it helps us coordinate better within the program. There's a forum. We all come together. We spent hours together going through these 2,000 lines on an Excel table, talking about each one specifically, and it took months. But it was worth it, and we feel like we've got a product now that'll be useful as we move forward.
I've in another life, I've worked on grant applications where the first screening was done, the federal agency used members of the professional community to help do some of the screening of the grant applications. And so you could apply to be a panelist and help score the preliminary applications preliminarily. Is that something you've ever considered doing? I know for me it was a really great learning experience to be able to be on the other side of the table looking to see what everybody else had submitted and how it works with the agency's requirements and needs. And it meant that in the future, when I applied, I could do a better job of meeting my organization's needs with the funder's needs. Is that something you've ever considered or would consider?
We've not done that since I've been here.
We have not considered it. Maybe if we knew more about it, we could give you a better answer. But we've got kind of a time crunch, for one thing. I mean, part of the UL issue is getting all that type of work done in a specific time slot so that we can get these applications moved along. So we would have to adjust the timeline quite a bit, I think.
Well, it also distributes some of the work a little bit. So, you know, there's an initial screening, and so the real decision-making process, you know, you only look at a portion of the applications, any one person, until you get up to the highest level.
Henry or Tina, help me out. I forget if it was an O&D study or the GAO, but one of those studies, that question was asked of the state. I want to say it was the GAO. But that question was asked if the state uses a panel of non-agency people. So
I mean, it's been
we'll see
great
what comes out.
experience for me.
So you're saying it's a good teaching tool as well?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, when I applied the next year, my application more closely matched the need of the funding organization because I had a better idea of what they were looking for and what was in the range of possibilities.
Right, and even if we don't have it now, and whatever might happen from that, we're always, I know State Board's always willing to work with y'all and help y'all better understand. One in our request for proposals, we have that, how we're going to rank them, but we can work with you, give you examples to help you better understand how to format your applications.
Yeah. And I've gotten that, and it's been very helpful.
Okay, but I see.
I want to get some clarification on something that Tina said. Did you say that you have had 2 success stories in this region, or your goal is to get 2 success stories in different regions?
The goal, I think that's set out by the region, was 2 per state.
Per year?
Per year, I'm sorry, yeah, per year.
Maybe they're out there, and what you say, what they are, it'll remind me, but can you give me some examples of success stories and what we should be hoping to see? I don't mean to be skeptical, but the land use is changing, the patterns are changing, people are moving into each watershed, the activities are changing, and a lot of times my frustration is this is a moving target, and if the money's based on a success story, I'd like to see what you're using, because I sure want to try that. Because I'm a little skeptical that we're just not going to meet the successes that you're hoping for.
Well, EPA has a national website for success stories, and again, you can Google that and find it. If you have trouble, let me know, I'll send it to you. But Texas has 2, I believe, up right now. It's Fosdick Lake and Lake Como in the Fort Worth area, urban area. Aquila Lake for Atherton. There are 3 ways that you can get credit for a success story. One is by full restoration of water quality standards, and that's for an impaired watershed that's on the Bureau 3D list. If you meet water quality standards for 1 or more impairments or pollutants, then you have done non-point source work in that watershed. That's the non-point source work. And you can claim credit for that. And basically they do a little write-up, kind of a fact sheet kind of thing, just kind of giving a summary of all the work that was done and how the approach to restoring water quality was done. We submit that to headquarters, goes through it, edits it, determines, that it's good, and then puts it up on their website, and you get a success story credit. The second way to get success story credit is by partial restoration. So if you can show that there is, like I said, 1 or more pollutants, or that the third way is that you show statistically that there is significant improvement towards meeting water quality standards, then you can get a success story. So those three things. And the bar is very high. It's very difficult. But there are quite a few listed, I don't know, there's a lot listed nationally on that website. But they all have really good write-ups.
Could you elaborate a little on the difference in a success as a story and a measure of success?
I think measures of success are varied. I think you had one slide that said, you can call them different things, but milestones, measures of success, however we're going to judge the program, the watershed, and the project. These success stories from EPA, like Tina said, there's some fairly structured guidance on exactly what EPA defines and expects as a success to be used to write a success story.
The success story is kind of the media label. It's actually a programmatic parameter metric that the program is rated by. And it's called WQ10. It's water quality dash number 10. And there are SP12s, and there are all these different designations, and they all have some meaning, meaningful way to grade progress or the success of the program nationally. Those you drill down, and each region or each state is assigned a portion of that national number. And a WQ10 is what they call it officially. Success story is just the layman's terms, the media label that they put on it. But those are both the same thing. So the success story website actually lists all those projects that qualified as a WQ10. So it's really confusing. Now, a measure of success, you can look at it on several different scales. Programmatically, like Aaron said, you may be looking at milestones to determine your success for the state program. I believe on your application, your project application for the grant, there's a box that says measures of success, and that is kind of whatever it takes to show that project is doing what it's supposed to do. Whether your programmatic measures of success may be that you have 5 watershed meetings a year, or you might have 3 outreach events per year. Or they could be something environmental, like you're going to reduce loads of nitrogen by 25%. So
to take this to an individual project level, you're talking about a measure of success. You're looking for, EPA and I guess the state's going to be looking for an increased level of measures of success. If I understood some of those slides right. Increased accountability for those. If you have those measures of success that were defined up front in the grant and you meet those, say for instance, Plum Creek Watershed, and Nikki had a presentation on, there were several things that were in there that she reported some of them were going very well, some of them have changed over time. Will those be the threshold or that measure of success that you're looking for in order to check that box off? Or are you looking to have a success story for calling it a successful grant or calling it a successful project?
When the U.S. representative comes and says, well, what are you spending the money on? You can whip out a piece of paper and says, this is what happened in Texas. Look, it's great. I mean, is that?
Well, I guess not only that, but you're talking about accountability.
Yeah,
to me, there's quite a bit of accountability that's gone into the Plum Creek project. But maybe the water quality standards are not being met, so it's not a success.
Yes.
well, okay.
And often that's going to take it could take a long time. It's a 3-year grant. It may take 10 years to get it back in shape. And as Debbie's mentioned, it's kind of a moving target with changing populations.
I really wish they hadn't called them a success story, because it was really misleading. I mean, because it's so subjective. You know, is success, like you're saying, is success fully restored water quality, or is it not letting it degrade more than it was already degrading? So the measures of success within a project or within the program are established by the state, and based on its own level of comfort with accountability. I mean, do the stakeholders want a certain level of improvement? Does the state need a certain level of improvement? So that it's determined by what's appropriate for that geographic scale, program scale, and watershed. Nationally, a success story is pretty stringent. You can full restoration, partial restoration, or statistically significant improvement. That's pretty much set. So they're really two separate things, the success stories and then these measures of success that are project or program specific.
So on the success stories, like Tina said, we have 3 right now that are on EPA's website and approved, and they're all because of full delistings. They have achieved their standards. And so when us and TCQ sit down and go down the list of which projects, which watersheds, which water bodies are potential success stories that we can submit to EPA, I know Tina just said there are 3 methods, but for us, we think those other 2, the partial and the statistically one, are extremely difficult and hard to prove, like you said. And so our first question that we ask is, was it delisted off the 303 delist? And then number 2, why was it delisted? Was it delisted because there was action taken in that water body to improve water quality conditions? So if the standard was changed and it got delisted, not a success story. If more monitoring was done, but and the water quality conditions just changed, probably not a success story. We must have done something to actively improve that water quality to qualify for this concept of a success story. I know this is a panel discussion for us 3 agencies up here, but I know in the crowd, Lucas, you've been helping us with one success story, and you have any insights on the details of what EPA and we asked you to write for a success story? What is included in that?
That's basically all the ins and outs of how the success was achieved. I mean, one, where did it come from and where did it get to? And then like Aaron was saying, is all the hows of how you actually made that success happen by implementing actions in that watershed. So it was a pretty in-depth description that we had to write, well, I think within 900 words or some minuscule word count there. So it was pretty challenging in that regard to get all the information crammed into there. But it's really just a cookbook, if you will, of how that success actually happened.
What watershed was that, and what did it get delisted for?
It was Buck Creek, and it was bacteria.
Jay's got a question.
Along those same lines, how are the success stories, or how is that being used by the GAO or OMB as far as what the program's accounted for? We talk a lot about program receiving reduction in funding and whatever else. If you're going to take this to Congress and say, hey, this is what the program is doing, how are they measuring your program?
I think Aaron had a slide on that. You said 1%?
Yeah, I guess it was 1% of.
So they're looking at total water bodies being restored or coming off a 303D list, or how is that being measured?
That 1% I want to say was what was on the list, or what was NPS impaired. But that is our biggest metric, where we're always being asked where the success stories, and for Texas receiving the amount of money it does compared to other states, we can't compete with their rates. I mean, that's what it boils down to. It's like we need to clean up some water and get those off the list.
Well, I'm just thinking from a holistic standpoint, and the folks in this crowd are looking to go through and develop projects in order to show success, so the program can continue to exist, and so they can restore their water bodies. And they want to be able to show successes, but they need to know how to do that. And I think some of that gets lost in, okay, what do we need to do? What practices do we need to do to show success, not just for a watershed, but for this program, and making sure that the right types of projects are so you guys, it can be helpful for you guys too.
One thing that we have asked for, or have wanted a whole lot more of, is on-the-ground implementation of actual BMPs, and somewhat less of the outreach and education efforts, because those are kind of hard to quantify or kind of relate to water quality as well. we have issues though in Texas with, we're actually around the nation with landowners buying in as well, so that's something, a hurdle we need to get over. But yeah, just kind of structural BMPs is kind of one of our main drives, I guess.
I mean, you look at the size of our watersheds, Lucas was about to say, they're a lot bigger than a lot of those other states.
No, yeah, I understand, but I mean, this is, you know, they're up in Washington and they just,
I
money
understand the disconnect there, but I mean, it's, you know, if we're managing on a Huck 12 here that's the size of a Huck 8 and, you know, in the east, you know, what, you know,
Well, and I guess from my experience anyway, and I was pretty involved in the Aquila project, especially early on and during the implementation, is that, you know, folks don't want to know, or they don't want to go through and pollute water. So if you go through and you show them either how they're doing it or how they can make those reductions. And we saw a huge success in Aquila, and a lot of that was done with education. Yes, there were implementation dollars too, and that was very helpful. But I would say that education provided as much of a reduction as what actual on-the-ground BMPs are. You know, making that connection on how you go through and quantify reductions through education may be more of a challenge, but it may also be a better way, because if you go out and I can give someone $10,000 to go do something, but a lot of times if you tell them not to, you can save yourself $10,000 and still get those reductions or those successes. So just something to keep in mind when we're talking about educational programs, because I think if we're able to go through and say, I don't know if it's through surveys or some other way, and, you know, are you willing to adopt this? Kind of like the survey we had earlier on their clickers. If 50% say they go through and they adopt something, you could definitely show some sort of quantifiable reduction based on those efforts.
In your initial question, Jay, one of the things that I heard was, if this success story is one metric that is being used, how can we report and show other forms of success, interim progress to achieving restoration and those things? And that's been part of the debate that I think all the states have been having with EPA, is that there's been a lot of weight placed on this one single metric of a delisting and a success story. And EPA and headquarters and at the regional level, we have conversations about how can we do a better job of showing this interim progress to ultimately get to that. But
and going on down the list, you know, I've seen, I mean, you guys talked about the other metrics too, the watershed protection plans, as specific for load reductions among other things. But, you know, how is that data being used? Are those just interim successes? Or I guess ultimately you have to have a load reduction to measure your restoration. But is that how that's being used?
It can be.
How do y'all use load reductions that are achieved through 319 that we report to y'all? What do y'all do with that data?
Through grids.
Or what do y'all do with that data?
So the load reporting is reported to the grids. It's an online database. It's national. We have 3 matrices for that, and floods, phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment. They set annual goals for them, and as a nation is how we're graded on that. So I've always thought there was a disconnect between that also and then the success story metrics, because they don't there's not a positive or complete correlation with them. But there are 2 different things that, we have to attack it from that angle. We need to get these reductions in the system or reported somehow. And we need to get the success stories. So there's just some balance that needs to be achieved there. Grids as lately it's been developed, or it's a little more user friendly. So now we're starting to get some more of the states kind of utilize it more. So we're able to crunch numbers now a little bit and see where dollars are being spent, what type of activities. So I'm starting to go along that line to kind of generate reports and maybe provide information to the states that they can utilize. But it's mainly it's pretty much reporting kind of those reductions.
But we do have a goal.
Yeah.
There's a goal set upon us from Washington to meet that goal through the states. So there's a goal set out each year, and then we have to upload these load reductions February 15th, and then those numbers, if I'm not mistaken, go to Congress to show what we're doing state and regional wise. At least that's what was told to me in Denver this year, that these are numbers are being used to look at.
Yeah, they'll look at these load reductions on a yearly basis, kind of we give out grants for 3 years, but they'll look at what 1 year's worth of implementation is going to be doing with that money. And that's how Congress looks at it.
Something I don't think a lot of people know is that, we asked all our collaborators to turn these quarterly project reports and your deliverables and these load reductions. And that stuff goes into GRITS, and it's a way for the state EPA to communicate. But a lot of people don't realize that GRITS is publicly available. So those reports, GRITS is EPA's grants reporting and tracking system. And that's where your quarterly reports get uploaded. That's where these load reductions get uploaded. It is publicly available.
Well, I want to add on to the GRITS discussion. That also follows under one of the parameters we're judged on as a program is WQ9. We talked about WQ10 as a success story and partial or full restoration, but WQ9 is load reductions of what Henry said, phosphorus, well, the nutrients in the sediments. And so we do get partial credit, at least for that. Not partial, but that's another way to positively judge the program. We may not have restored a water body, but we've reduced sediment loads for this past year. So it's just an alternative. It doesn't necessarily correlate to full restoration of a segment. But to go back to, I'd like to try to answer Jay's question on behalf of EPA. That's why we need these watershed plans to have load reductions. I know the Plum Creek example, we could judge success of implementation, and that's why it's been a fully accepted watershed plan, but we need good watershed plans that have these metrics of implementation, but also metrics of water quality improvements. And so if you have a fully approved or accepted watershed plan, ideally you'd have a list of projects laid out for the next 10 years that in year 2013, we know the Plum Creek group is probably going to come to Soul Board or TCQ to apply to fund that portion of the watershed plan. And so we expect by 2018 that Plum Creek would be restored, and then we'll have a success story. Success story is a longer time frame and harder to achieve, but it's based off of having a good watershed plan or a team deal.
And I think, Debbie, the problem of seeing a moving target, that's kind of what the watershed planning process is designed to try to minimize, is that you have more knowledge, more local control, and you have a better idea of what the problem is. So, but I can see that it may be so complex that you may have thrown everything you got at it and you're not achieving what you want to achieve. Then there's some frustration with what do you do next. And I think that the RAP project process and getting other state agencies and other components of the state agencies involved in looking at that data and involving some other experts in that could probably help that.
Also, just to add with about the GRITS and those three measures, we as a nation I want to say we either fall short or we barely make the goals for phosphorus reductions and nitrogen reductions. And sediment is always, we really suppress that, so whatever y'all can do to bump those numbers up would be really appreciated.
So I was just wondering, standards for sediment in Texas, do we? We have no impairments.
No nutrients.
Right? Is that how we look at it?
So I was just wondering, listening to other people talk, we're working on the Cypress Creek out in the Wimberley area, and it's not on the 303D list, it just has elevated levels at times, so it is a preventative watershed protection plan. I'm wondering, is that something that could potentially, will it potentially be a success story for you guys that something that we can measure out? Do we have to project out 10 years and say, oh, well, you know, with increased development, they're still not impaired, and this is a success now? I'm just curious.
I don't believe that the WQ10 metric, the success story metric, was designed with that in mind. Brian, do you know if they're developing any metrics to address water quality improvements in non-impaired watersheds, for healthy watersheds?
The only metrics I know of for healthy watersheds are really more indicator measures for us to say how many of our states have gone through the healthy watershed integrated assessment. So something like that doesn't exist yet, but that's one of the things that we're talking about with the initiative is how do you actually measure success in a healthy watershed? And it would be sort of an anti-303D list kind of thing where a watershed that doesn't get listed over time when you're working in it might be a metric that we might have in the future, but we don't currently have it.
So does that mean we'll be successful?
No, I was about to say that in our annual report, in our non-point source management program annual report that comes out every fiscal year, we can talk about that success. As the Cypress Creek project moves forward and stuff is implemented and education is programs are put on and growth occurs, and if it stays unimpaired and not on the list, that's absolutely something we can talk about in that report and call a lowercase success. Capital success being one of the EPA's delisted.
And kind of along that line, and going back to something Jay had asked, right now EPA is developing new matrices to gauge the program. I'm not so sure how soon that will come out. I think they're still tossing around ideas, so I mean, they're being developed, so hopefully that'll help out the program.
And there's a growing body of healthy watersheds projects in the state, and that's something that the state can choose to put into their management plan as a priority. So the state can develop their own framework as a measure for milestones and measures of success centered around healthy watersheds. So it's not restricted by EPA's framework at all.
Clint?
We're going to use the word accepted plan. When you're talking about an accepted plan, does that mean a plan that the goal is delisting, or a plan that just has either maintaining or improving water quality but not actually being delisted? Would a plan be accepted if their goal was not delisted or becoming delisted?
No, if it's impaired, the goal needs to be full restoration. You know, interim goals could be, water quality improvement and partial restoration, but the goal of the plan has to be full restoration.
And what time period? 300 years?
There's no set time period.
A reasonable time.
A reasonable, yeah. There's some vague language in the guidance about that.
So if it's a reservoir that's 90 years old and it took 90 years to get to where it is, what's reasonable?
Sometime after you retire.
The question I have is, going back to the WAP, how will it affect budgeting discussions, and how will the budget affect utilization of the WAP?
Well, the WAP identifies the priorities for the state, so funding will be limited to water bodies on the WAP. They're listed on the WAP.
It's going to be. Aaron said an important thing earlier regarding RUAAs. If they don't contribute to a success story, because say delisting would not be considered an action, will they be viewed less favorably than TMDLs or water protection plans?
It depends. We've used some of our money to do, our 319 money to do UAAs, recreational ones, but not a lot. TCQ, y'all haven't yet, but I would say that it comes down to that WAP table like Arthur said. Whatever the strategy is, that's going to influence what EPA and the state's going to decide to be allowable projects. It all starts with the water quality standards, we know that, so we have to make sure that the most reasonable and sensible standard to set for that water body.
I think as the WAP process has gone forward, the program has evolved as well, and something like a water quality standards evaluation is now seen as an important step in a watershed planning process overall. So in that context, it could very well be a top priority for a particular water body to get that question resolved before you move on to more intensive work such as watershed planning for BMPs, etc. So we are able now to better organize our work and recognize situations where a water quality standards evaluation
in just their backyard, and we get very little participation in the big meetings. So we've gotten, we do those every other year before the work plan is due, because it's in the act and we're required to do it by law. But but whenever we are in any kind of meeting, we'll mention the process, especially for the backyard program at the time.
Because I know our staff went to basically every single one of those where WAP was discussed on the agendas, and coming back and talking, each one was a little bit different and conducted a little bit different. I do know, talking with TCQ, that this next year they're planning on trying to streamline, make them more consistent across the state as to exactly how they're done. And I know that is the talk is going through each of the impairments, within your basin.
Yeah, we did that on their, because we NRA participated by phone, but went through line by line for this initial round of Aaron showed these iterative process. Hopefully next time, there may be a little bit more participation than maybe just the CRP partners, but other projects that are going on, people that are involved in those can be involved in those talks also.
I think, Alan, a lot of getting the word out about the local is going to be through, CRP and the basin, in the backyard, type meetings to let them know.
Now, I know not all CRP partners are created equal, and some do a much better job than others about getting that word out. And since so much is hinging on this WAP process, as far as acquiring these 319 funds, I think it'd be excellent to have a very, as much as I hate the word transparency, a very transparent way to get these notifications out about when this feedback can be given.
Use the listserv.
One of the things that us and TCQ talked about, I guess it was last Friday, is we're going to probably the next week be sending out a whole bunch of emails from all the various listservs we have. I mean, there's a TMDL listserv, there's a TCQ non-point source listserv, there's the Watershed Coordinator one, we have ours. And so we are going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks.
On our CRP steering committee meetings, we have a hard time getting people to come, just like he said. I don't know if it's a matter of not wanting to travel, or if it's a matter of whatever their authority, they're going to take care of it. I don't know why I need to be there. But, so I've always tried to find some way of attracting them there. So we try to put as many issues that we feel like a stakeholder would like to talk about listed in the agenda or somehow given to them. What I need to do is look at at the WAP priority watersheds and maybe put that in the letter. We are going to have a discussion on this watershed with this impairment. We may only get a handful of people there that are in that backyard, but at least you'll have the people who you want to hear at that discussion at that meeting. It'll take up a lot of time on the steering committee meeting, so we need to make sure CRP is okay with us, tying up a lot of that meeting with that. But I don't have a problem with that as long as I can get the stakeholders there to hear what they want to hear.
Well, it should be a little different this year since there's some specific recommendations on the table, and people need to look at that and make sure they understand it and they're okay with it. And so you have a little bit different landscape this year than last year.
All right, we need to wrap up. I would like to give each of the panelists the opportunity to give us one last tidbit of wisdom before they leave. And I guess I would like you to leave us with, if you were in our shoes, you were a watershed coordinator, you're aware of, all these things that are coming from Congress, from from EPA headquarters and all the things that y'all have dealing with. What would you do differently if you were in our shoes to make the program more effective, to ensure longevity of the program and ultimately water quality improvement? So each of y'all, one thing, and I think it's a great panel discussion. I think it's something we probably need to continue this discussion probably in July. I've got a lot more questions out there. We didn't even get close to getting to them, but yeah.
I'll go first. I love Nikki's presentation. The accountability and the reporting is important. And what's even more important is that she wrote a plan that lended itself to accountability and reporting. It's all, if you write a good plan, it's relatively easy to implement it later. So I would encourage people to take that seriously and to look at the milestones and the commitments that you're making, both in the short term, and there's a difference between short term and long term. I don't know what projects we're going to be doing 10 years from now, but I do know the projects we're going to do next year and what those are going to produce, and we're obligated to follow through on that. And then after the first 3-year period, you get those results, maybe you need to update your plan and generate a new suite of milestones. But I think this idea of writing a plan that lends itself to monitoring and tracking and accountability and then following through on that is where we need to go. I'm looking forward to that.
All right, Aaron. We're going down the table. I think I'm going to say the same thing that Arthur just said. We need y'all's help to document and report success with a capital S, success with a lowercase s, interim progress. And that is at the watershed level, like this whole meeting was about, these watershed report cards, what Arthur just talked about, but that's also with your individual projects. Through your quarterly reports, which get uploaded to GRITS and EPA, and the public and Congress sees those. So we have to do a better job in all the different mechanisms we have of reporting success, be it at the project reports, be it at the Clean Rivers Program Basin Highlights Report, be it our non-point source annual report, be it our watershed report cards. We need everyone to do that better.
The tidbit I'd like to leave is just make use of your meetings that you have, your public meetings, the best that you can, to make sure you're covering everything that you need to stay on track and on time with the plans and the work plans that are set in place.
All right, and mine would be just communication, and I'm going to go from just my perspective and how I want to handle all these changes, because it all gets passed from the EPA to the states and then on to y'all, and just having very clear upfront conversations with y'all as we develop work plans, as we go through work plans and work to have these milestones, that the expectations are clear, and as they change, that we're working together to achieve those. And so that's going to be huge as we move forward.
I would suggest, there are a lot of partnerships and collaboration going on in the state, but I do feel there's a greater need for that now since resources are getting cut. And we have a lot of different agencies that specialize in certain activities, so partner up with them and see what you can do for them, see what they can do for you, and kind of trade off like that. And just to better leverage resources. Utilizing other sources of funding as well, such as the SRF funding that Aaron was talking about earlier. That's something that's been underutilized in the state for various reasons, but they're starting to make that a little more accessible to y'all, so look into that.
Don't be afraid to ask for help. If you have a question, pick up the phone and ask somebody. The chain of command and communication throughout this whole program is important, but there may be technical resources in places that you hadn't thought of. Don't just rely on who's already in your Rolodex for those of a certain age, or in your smartphone. Pick up the phone and call and ask. Maybe they can point you to somebody else who can. Speaking from EPA's perspective, I know You know, we're in Dallas and we all push papers and stuff like that, but 99% of us are scientists. We have expertise in water quality, wetlands, permitting, agriculture, climate. I mean, you just any environmental area you can think of, we have somebody who knows something about it, and probably a lot of institutional knowledge. So don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call.
All right, well, thank y'all. Let's get the phone here. Thank y'all very much for being on the hot seat there.